maybe I just, Adeline, go to the etiquette. So I do it slowly, and after we can start. So welcome everybody. So you are muted. Your video is off and your chat will be disabled, but you can use the Q&A tab to put your questions, and the moderator, Andrew, will take the questions. The webinar is recorded, and we count on you to ask a lot of questions. And we will have a first session of a short introduction by the president of both clubs. And I let immediately the floor to Jérôme, president of the Wharton Club of France. Jérôme, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claude. Hello and welcome to everyone. I'm very happy and thankful to have with us today a group of very experienced panelists and moderator to discuss the future of business education. When we started planning this conference with Wharton and INSEAD alumni, it was clear to us that we wanted to bring together the perspectives of faculty members, school senior management, as well as alumni. The response was fantastic from everyone, and this is why we have such a great panel today. I would also like to emphasize the incredibly strong relationship and partnership we have between INSEAD and Wharton alumni. We've had several jointly organized events in the past years. All of them have been virtual during the pandemic, but we are very much looking forward to an in-person major event in 2022 that we are building together. I will now let Pierre continue with a few additional words. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jérôme. I'm Pierre, chairman of the INSEAD French Alumni Association, and I would like to thank very much the French Wharton, the Wharton Alumni Association for co-organizing with us this event. In the continuity of the INSEAD French Alumni Association events, The Essential, and in the spirit of the INSEAD purpose, Force for Good, we are indeed very glad to co-host this event on business education. Marianne Wright, the famous American activist for children's rights and defense, was saying, education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and world better than what you found. I guess it can be applied as well for business education. As INSEAD Dean Hillian Mihoff is often saying, the challenge of today cannot be solved with yesterday's thinking. Business school should commit to developing leaders who can champion business as a force for good. So I'm glad to discover today what are the most important skills business school should teach today, tomorrow, and how. And beyond business school, how can alumni play a role in shaping the what to teach? I am now introducing to you Guillaume Roels. Guillaume is Professor of Global Technology and Innovation at INSEAD and the Research Director of the INSEAD Wharton Alliance.
Thank you, Pierre. So good day, everybody. My name is Guillaume Roels, and as Pierre mentioned, I'm the Research Director of the INSEAD Wharton Alliance. The Alliance was founded on a shared vision of developing research and education to have a global impact. It's a vision that came out of these two schools. It has been around for 20 years. To date, more than 2,100 MBA students have been on an exchange. And we always look forward to fostering networking opportunities between the two schools. And this event is a great avenue for this kind of thing. So the pandemic is preventing us from traveling, but it should not prevent us from connecting. And we are delighted to see this kind of event happening. The topic couldn't be more timely. We live in very turbulent times, but turbulence also means a lot of innovation, and you're in good hands tonight to more about what is going on in both schools. So with that, Jérôme, over to you.
I would now like to introduce Andrew Jack. Andrew is Global Education Editor for the Financial Times, writing on educational issues around the world and editorial lead for the Free FT Schools program. Andrew, up to you.
Thanks very much. And welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a little bit darker looking and a bit grayer than in the photo you just saw, but it's very good to join you here from London to moderate this discussion with two of the extremely leading international business schools. So I have a lot of contact with both of their institutions, and it's great to see alumni here for this discussion over the next hour or so. So we've got four great panelists and two questions to put both to them, but also to you who are watching. The first is, what are the most important skills business schools should teach today and tomorrow, and how? And then the second one, which is beyond business school, how can alumni play a role in shaping that issue of what to teach to match those skills that we're discussing? I can say a few words and then I'll open it to our panelists and then to you. And I would encourage you, please, as soon as possible, to also start using the Q&A function to pose your questions. And I'll try to get through them as many as I can, because clearly lots of interesting opinions, but really keen to hear your perspectives. From the point of view of the Financial Times, of course, and as you know, we take business and business education and the role of business schools very seriously. We're seeing all sorts of fundamental transformations and changes at the moment. Of course, in terms of the sorts of topics that people want to be covered, whether it's around digital transformation, around leadership, around the disruption short and long term that COVID has caused, around the issues of diversity and inclusion, around sustainability and values more generally. And if that's on the themes, then also, of course, in terms of the style of pedagogy, the role of teaching cases, of capstone projects, of traditional lectures, increasingly, of course, of a hybrid form of teaching and learning and interaction, and thinking about the disruptions with new players, including some non-business schools getting actively involved, the role of online learning more generally, and lifelong learning, perhaps transforming and disrupting that more traditional discrete model of very often diploma-based training. So some really interesting issues to discuss today. Let me very briefly introduce our panelists. So Sergey Netesin, who's the Senior Vice Dean for Innovation and Global Initiatives at the Wharton School. Samir Hasija, the Dean of Executive Education at INSEAD. Pascal Ritz, who was a INSEAD MBA for the year of '96 and is Chair, Board Director, Strategic Advisor, and a former CEO, and Jacqueline Curzon from Wharton in '93, Executive and Non-Executive Board Director in areas including transportation, pension funds, and M&A. So let me begin with this first question. I'll ask our panelists to provide their initial reflections, and then we'll open to you who are watching for your views and questions. So the question first, what are the most important business skills that business schools should be teaching today, tomorrow, and how they should be teaching them? Sergey, let's hear first from you, please.
Sure, thank you, Andrew. So, of course, the most important skills that we should be teaching now and in the future are the skills that are demanded by the market. And if you look at historically at the Wharton School was founded as a school of accounting, finance, and economics. We were usually famous for our finance education, and something close to 80% of our MBA students, for instance, majored in finance. This has always been the case, probably for 100 years or so. And career paths of our students looked often very similar. They came from Wall Street and then they graduated and they went again to Wall Street, maybe to a slightly different role or different company. This has changed dramatically after 2008-2009 crisis. Now, instead of 80% of students majoring in finance, something like 30% of students major in finance, and finance Wall Street firms are no longer the biggest employers of our students. Instead, what we see two majors evolving, and these are kind of the key skills that students demand. One is innovation and entrepreneurship. And the reason is simple. If you look at the biggest companies in the world, they are Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, So all of these are high-tech companies. They require different set of skills. They're not that interested necessarily in financial skills. So that's what we are delivering. So we beefed up significantly our entrepreneurship and innovation major. The second major that evolved literally in the last 2-3 years is data analytics, and this encompasses many things. But again, the same players, the same high-tech companies, which are the biggest companies in the world now, they demand those skills as well, because all of them are based on data and data analytics. So these two majors overtook finance as the most preferred major at Wharton, and they continue to grow. And we launched all kinds of initiatives related to those majors because, frankly, most of our students are now not going to Wall Street anymore. So I'll stop here and let others contribute.
But just briefly, Sergey, so you've talked about the themes, the topics. What about how to teach and how that's changing the way in which you approach pedagogy?
Absolutely. So, of course, a pandemic changed overnight how we teach, and Wharton embraced online learning a long time ago. We are still #1 business content provider on Coursera, for example. We launched all kinds of Wharton Live and so on. What we believe is the future, and what we are kind of betting on heavily nowadays, is that the future is going to be something around what we call alternative reality now. And this is related to metaverse, and the rebranding of Facebook and so on. So what we launched in response, we launched a unit called Wharton Interactive. And Wharton Interactive creates a new wave of simulations. This is not something you are used to. We all played simulations for many years now. You go in, you enter some numbers, and you say, okay, I allocate 10% to operations, 20% to marketing, and you kind of play along. These are completely new wave of simulations. You talk to real people, you participate in calls, you respond to emails, people contact you on Slack, you create a presentation, you send it, you get on a call. So this is a very kind of unstructured simulation, and any kind of a pass of any particular player can be one of a billions of things. We hire real kind of Hollywood actors and directors to create those simulations. They're immersive, they're real. I can invite everyone to play them. We have a free simulation that anyone can register and enjoy. So you can Google Blue Sky Ventures, very, very nice simulation for 90 minutes. We believe this is a future. This is digital, this is scalable, but it's completely immersive, and it can be paired up with your regular classes. So you can play the simulation, then go to class, debrief, discuss, and so on.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks very much. And I'm just having a look at Blue Sky Ventures. Interesting concept. So Samir, let's hear from you. Tell us what you think are the key skills and how they should be taught.
Andrew, thanks a lot, and good day to everybody. Listen, I completely echo what Sergey just said, and clearly what he's talking about are unstoppable trends. These are not fads and temporal trends, and definitely an indication of where the market is going. So perhaps one way what I can do is complement some of the things that he said and add a little, kind of step back a little bit and discuss this at a philosophical level. One of the key things that we are noticing is, if I was to use an analogy, is that leaders and executives going forward, they need to develop some level of ambidextry, which is very, very important. So if I was to use an analogy of altitudes, I'd like to think about it as, a 50,000 foot view where you're really thinking about the bends on the road ahead, getting comfortable with ambiguity, trying to look ahead before things happen and trying to charter the course of your organization. So really develop that vision. Then there is a skill at the 50 feet level, which is the ability to execute smoothly and deliver time and time again on targets, on operations, and really getting stuff done. And then there is the 5 foot level thinking, which is, how do I make my people come along with it? How do I develop emotional intelligence? How do I make sure that I understand the perspective that people bring in? What we are noticing today, and we've been noticing this for some time, but a lot more today, is that executives and leaders in particular need to develop the ability to master all these three levels, and they can't just stay comfortable at one level. And not only do they need to develop the mastery of all three levels, they need to be able to change and operate at different levels depending on the situation. So a particular situation may require them to operate at the 50 feet, where they have to be tactical, they have to be operational, and they have to drive efficiency. But there are certain times when you have to suddenly up the level and really start thinking a little bit about the vision and look ahead of the curve. Yet there are times when you have to be sensitive to people and to emotional sensitivities and thinking about the nuances in how people are going to react to it. So developing this level of this ability to travel through these altitudes is becoming a very key leadership skill, a very key executive skill. So adding to the content of what people should learn, we're developing developing this level of dexterity is becoming very important. So that's kind of a core skill, but at a meta level rather than the content level, so to speak. But I completely agree with Sergey, what he talked about in terms of the shift in the content, and I do believe that it's not a temporal trend. So that's one. The second thing is that, you know, people need to grapple and to make sense of the somewhat tension that exists between the conventional thinking of, you know, the business, the strategy, and the new age thinking about, you know, value creation for the society and not just the organization through which you work. And what we are noticing is a bit of a shift where, you know, back in the day, there was a question that, of course, I want to create value for my firm, but I have these constraints that I've got to satisfy that I'm not hurting the world, that while I'm creating value for my organization, the world is not worse off, right? And there was this tension. And we're noticing a shift where people are asking us, hey, isn't sustainability or isn't, you know, looking out for the society not just a constraint, but actually an opportunity for my business? And can I not look at ESG or sustainability or any one of these things like an opportunity rather than a constraint? And so this shift is very important, and moving our pedagogy or moving our development along these lines is becoming really, really important and a very interesting conversation, as opposed to the conversation which was, you know, a few decades ago, where it was all about satisfying a constraint rather than looking at it as an opportunity. And Andrew, the last point, I guess, that you asked was around the pedagogy. And again, completely agree with Sergey that, you know, we've got to think about pedagogy as an immersive experience where people are developing the ability to think more than just, you know, getting frameworks that they copy and apply by becoming people who can match and connect the dots. But this is more about developing that immersive kind of learning experience, which requires us to rethink pedagogy very carefully. You know, to a large extent, we deliver similar experiences to a cohort. You know, a cohort comes in 50 people, 100 people, 500 people, and they all go through the same experience. But you know, learning is a very personal thing. It's, you know, we've personalized our cars, we've personalized our shoes, we personalized our coffees, but learning to a large extent is a cohort experience. But we've got to think learning about how can we personalize it. And when I say personalize, I'm not just talking about what people learn, but I'm talking about how they learn, where they learn, and even at what speed they learn. And what we are noticing is that our ability to leverage learning technologies, you know, digital is not just about putting a class on Zoom. It's about leveraging technologies in a way that we cannot in a face-to-face environment, and creating personalized experiences for individuals that cater to their particular learning needs, preferences, and aspirations. So these are some of the trends that we are noticing, and we really think this can change the way we think about education, especially in the business school.
And just briefly, Samir, but what does that mean then, that more personalized, technology-driven approach? What does that look like from the perspective of the student?
So the way it looks like is that I believe, and again, this ties down very nicely to lifelong learning concept for an individual, is that an individual should be able to carve out their entire journey of learning. And what does that journey include? The journey includes their ability to consume, you know, community-based courses where they go into a classroom or they go into a session. But at the same time, they should be able to carve out some personal time where they are interacting with perhaps asynchronous mechanisms of learning, whether it's a simulation or whether it's pre-recorded asynchronous material with the faculty, and use a plethora of learning tools available, simulations, virtual reality, augmented reality, and use all these in a way that cater to their individual needs, and more importantly, allow them to do it at their pace. So combining scheduled courses with on-demand courses to allow people to not only learn what they want, but also at what pace they want. And that's kind of a few examples of how people can personalize their learning.
Great, well, thanks very much. Pascal, what's your perspective on all this and what you're seeing in your multiple roles today in terms of what's really needed for the coming generation that you're hiring or engaging with?
Well, I think a lot of what Samir and Sergey mentioned resonate with what we're seeing. In the companies, you won't be surprised that the key challenge that we have is to have the right talent, retain and motivate the right talent. And the younger generation don't necessarily react the same way as the older one. And I would argue that the school also needs to make sure that the people we train do not necessarily represent the average of the people they are going to manage afterwards. And therefore, it's really important to think about how do you today recruit, motivate talent, because people will not stay or will not come just for the compensation or the title or the content of the job, but they are looking for something more. And I think it joins what Samir was talking about, is that you need to be able to both have a job where they deliver what you need, but they also need to find ways where they have the right community, they feel good about what they're doing, the company does have a purpose that aligns with what they want to do. And you need to be able to appeal to that. Otherwise, they're just, leaving the company. And I think that's actually something that is important to realize and think about, because again, the students we might have are very self-driven, very focused on what they want to achieve, but it's not necessarily what you will have when you manage your teams. The second thing is that there is a pandemic that, and we were chatting before the beginning of the webinar, that everybody's now using Zoom, but actually it had started before. It had started to be a lot more remote, and not everybody was coming to the company, or the company being so big that you have actually to create this team spirit. And I think that actually managing the hybrid environment or managing very dispersed teams is a skill that needs to be mastered if you really want to create value added, because you have the right team, not having just single individuals that are working on the same topic. So how are you going to interact with those teams? How do you balance the work from home or work remotely to create this team spirit where people together will deliver more than if that was the sum of the individual? And that leads me to a third point, which is we know tech and AI, and I think it was Sergey talking about the fact that people today are very attracted by these large tech companies. But everybody at leadership level needs to know what you can do thanks to technology, to data analytics, to AI, because there is nothing you can win in a very highly competitive world if you're not able to leverage and tap into those areas. So without being an expert of data analytics or AI, you need to know how good looks like. You need to know where to find the right talent and the right resources so that you can actually develop within your company the right human and technology interfaces so that you become very efficient. And last but not least, I think we talk about all this, and I was impressed by Sergey saying that we have people who are no longer wanting to work for Wall Street anymore. But that said, it remains super important to understand what is a driver for investors to be interested in your company, whether it is a public company or more and more, I mean, privately owned company. There is 10 times more private money than there was 10 years ago, or something of this direction. How do you create value? What is important to your investors? You know, having a great product might not be enough. You need, of course, to have the revenue and the profit and etc. But there are different models. How do you get the funding that you need to develop a successful company? And that actually needs to be not forgotten from the business school.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Pascal. Jacqueline, what's your take?
So I have to be careful not to repeat what my panelists have already said, which I fully support. I am of the old school. I majored in finance a few years ago at Wharton, and I'm still in the finance industry, in the pension fund mainly. And of course, sustainable investment is very, very important, and we have to find ways of as an industry, we have to cater to a lot of different stakeholders. It's not as simple as the world was in '93 when I graduated. The school used to say that we had an ethics class where it basically meant we must go beyond just the letter of the law. Well, today that's not enough. We have, it used to be that we were selling the fact that we were an international school. Well, who cares today? Everybody's international. It's well beyond that. Diversity also, that's not enough. The modern executive has to be data savvy. The modern executive has to focus on sustainable goals. He has to have soft skills. He has to have hard skills. I'm very happy to hear that my school is now focusing a lot on this artificial intelligence and data analytics that is necessary and needed in this new world that we have to navigate in. The school has is doing very interesting things in how it's teaching, using new tools for teaching, and I'll definitely look up the Blue Sky Ventures. I think I'm running out of things to say, but
well, that's perfect. So I'm very keen to open it up. Do please post your own questions or reflections, those who are watching. I mean, just one thing, perhaps coming back from to Sergey and Samir briefly, it's interesting, while Pascal and Jacqueline both mentioned some of the, as it were, the hard skills, including the data analytics, it sounds to me as though they, on the sort of receiving end, the recruiters, the managers and so on, are very much sending that message about values, sustainability, but also we heard about sort of emotional intelligence and so on, some of the kind of what are traditionally perhaps called soft skills. What do you think, Sergey and Samir? Did your initial reflections were a little bit focused on some of those harder, newer skills, but are these other values that we're hearing about just as important? Sergey?
Definitely new values are very, very important. I was trying to speak, so Wharton has programs now starting from high school students and all the way to very senior executives, right? So this is what we believe as kind of a lifelong learning, which is, again, a kind of a lot of schools talk about lifelong learning, and they usually think about educating students long after they get like undergraduate or MBA degree. We actually think in both directions. We think you have to start business education. I call it business education from cradle to grave. But, you know, it's not an official title or anything, but this is how I think about it. We have a number of programs for high school students. We have programs for middle school students now. Maybe soon we're gonna go to kindergarten. I'm not sure about that, but that's maybe in the next 10 years. And so kind of I was thinking about data analytics and entrepreneurship innovation as kind of cutting across this entire spectrum, right? Now, if you look at what different groups of students care about, it's pretty striking. So if the younger the students, the more they want to talk about sustainability, ESG, racial equality, and so on and so forth. So, and this is kind of interesting. So we know then that these students who are high school students now, they will come and be our undergraduates and MBAs, and then they're going to take executive education courses from us. So this is coming. This is very, very important. And I think, again, like if you look at high school students, all of them want to hear about those issues. If you look at executives in the United States, at least, well, not all of them are interested in those topics. I think Europe in that sense is far ahead of us in many ways. So that's kind of where we stand. But definitely one thing I want to mention is that our new dean, Erica James, she launched a series of talks which she calls Beyond Business. And these are talks which you can find on LinkedIn. They are available to anyone. Anyone can come and participate, where she every month she has a conversation with leaders in industry, in entertainment, in government, on topics like race. So for example, last year we ran a whole series on race, and we had a series which touched on such topics as race and the entrepreneurship, race and corporate power, race and selling of America, so these were kind of the topics last year. And this year the topics are climate change. So how to tackle climate crisis, how to redefine corporate governance, how to humanize ESG. And we try to take those topics and kind of clone them across all of our students from 10 years old to 100 years old. But of course, it's very, very different levels at which you can talk to those groups of students. So definitely we are doing that, and that's kind of a topic-wise, that's a big shift that we are also seeing.
Well, maybe Samir, let's start to go to some of the questions. I see Jean-Marc here is saying, given the growing importance of CO2 carbon emissions, the commitments being taken by governments and companies, are we coming to the time when a warning around carbon emissions might have more impact on the share price than a classic profit warning? How do Wharton and INSEAD address carbon emissions, CO2 accounting?
Yeah, listen, Andrew, it's a very important question, and again, it's an issue that is not only, and I think Pascal was saying this, it's an issue which is important, not just in a way to satisfy things, but in a way to make sure that you are doing proper justice to the seriousness of this topic, right? So firms can try and do a lot of greenwashing, and in the past perhaps they could get away with it, but now not only can they not get away with it, they're going to get heavily penalized if the activities that they do end up being genuinely greenwashing. And so what INSEAD, and I'm sure Sergey will speak about what Wharton is doing, what we're doing about this is taking a very rigorous approach. I mean, at the end of the day, what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that the core principles of rigorous relevance and impact, which is what schools like INSEAD and Wharton I think value, show up in our pedagogy. So we have faculty, and we have purposefully hired many faculty who specialize in topics like this. They've dedicated their entire academic careers in specializing in topics around sustainability, in topics around ESG, in topics around CO2 accounting, in topics like impact finance, and so on and so forth. And these faculty who are genuine researchers, so they're not just in the business of knowledge dissemination, they're actually in the business of knowledge creation as well. They then create their courses and thought leadership around these topics, which we then bring into our courses. So in degree programs, we try to bring them across a plethora of courses, not just by having special courses dedicated to these topics, but actually bringing in discussion of these topics in almost every course across our entire portfolio. So you could be doing a finance class, a marketing class, an operations class, an accounting class, an entrepreneurship class. These topics would be kind of interweaved into our daily conversation. But we'll also have special courses dedicated to this. In executive education, we are actually launching dedicated programs to these topics, where, both in our open portfolio programs, where we have people from all sorts of industries and all sorts of organizations coming in, as well as our custom programs, where we actually develop customized programs for specific organizations, where we bring in topics such as carbon accounting, such as impact finance, such as ESG, diversity and inclusion, and so on and so forth. So our pedagogy is constantly evolving, but the important thing to again highlight is that the experts that are doing this at INSEAD are the ones who are not only in the profession of knowledge dissemination, but they are actually the researchers who are in the profession of knowledge creation. So in some sense, we are trying to mix rigor, relevance, and impact in one mix to really create something which I think is meaningful.
Sure. And Jacqueline, I mean, you work in, as you say, a lot in the finance sector. I mean, does that resonate with you, the growing importance of focus around carbon emissions? Is it becoming more of a driver of investors? And do the business schools need to be doing more to think about these issues?
So there's no question that it's a topic. Every single conference that you go to is now, how do investors save the planet, and how can you reconcile returns on investment and climate? I can't remember who mentioned that more and more, I think it was Sergey, more and more these durable criteria are not considered as a constraint, but as an opportunity, and that's what us as an industry is trying to develop as well, not just the school. I mean, that has to be the path. Another thing that perhaps going slightly away from just the ESG and durable criteria, another thing that the school, when I was a student, wasn't focusing on was board governance. And I think that the average age of boards is coming down, and probably is something that's much more relevant to your student body than it was in my days. And I think I just followed the Financial Times NED diploma, which was fantastic. But that's very much something that the business schools should be also focusing on, is proper corporate governance at the board level. At the board level.
No, sure. Let me obviously you can come back if I've missed anyone who wants any more points on this, but let's move perhaps to another question, a very good one here. So if you were to create a business school in 2022 as a startup, how would you create it? Mm-hmm. So starting from the zero base. Pascal, any thoughts from your perspective?
My goodness, I'm in the industrial business. I'm a healthcare professional, so I never thought about building a business schools, but I think that two things that Samir and Sergey mentioned, and I apologize if I don't attribute it to the right person, but the fact that it is lifelong learning now, and I, being on the board of INSEAD, I know we work a lot on it, and Sergey talked about it. So it seems to be something that nowadays people are really thinking about, which is how am I going to build learning throughout my whole life? And I think that this is really important because you need to think ahead of time of the different phases in life, because your needs might change a little bit. And probably when you're at the business schools, you need a lot more hard skills than soft skills, although Jacqueline and I were discussing before the panel that actually nowadays, as soon as you lead people, manage people, you do need to have more soft skills probably than what we needed when we started. But as you evolve, you need to understand all the ESG, the topic. I mean, you just mentioned, and Jacqueline talked about the board. I have to insist that being on multiple boards like Jacqueline, 2 years ago, people were seeing ESG as something that you had to pay attention to. Because people were pushing you. So a lot of the companies were reacting to. Nowadays, they have learned how to make it meaningful to them and embed it into the business so that actually it makes total sense to what they're doing. So if I was building a business school, I would be really thinking about how do I build it for the long run? You know, is it a lifelong learning subscription? How do I build it so that I have this sense of community that can evolve with the different stages of life? And I'm always coming back to what Samir and Sergey are talking about. We are now in a hybrid world, and how do we leverage technology to make it both community with a community building, but also very much on demand?
Sure. So, Sergey, you talked earlier about the importance of entrepreneurship, maybe not particularly in this context, but back to this question. So if you were creating a new business school now from scratch, what would it look like?
I think the biggest shift we see in education is unbundling. So there is less and less of a demand for degrees and more of a demand for bits and pieces of information which upskill you, update you, or satisfy needs of a particular person. And that's where personalization that Samir talked about comes in, right? So we are seeing increasingly students who maybe have a degree in literature, but then they realized that they want a job in a Wall Street firm. So they want to get a quick certificate in data analytics or finance or something like that. And unfortunately, there are not that many top institutions serving their needs. If you were to come to me now and say, hey, I want to take just one undergraduate course from you, and I don't even need a credit or anything like that, I don't want to go through admission process, I would not be able to satisfy your needs. And this is the capabilities that we are building right now. We are trying to offer increasingly unbundled education in a piecemeal. If you want a credit, we can give you credit. If you want just certificate, we can give you certificate. If you care about alumni status, there are programs that give you alumni status, but without a degree. And so we are trying to create this whole system of electronic badging, which will kind of on a blockchain, of course, because we are in 21st century, will certify the amount and level and quality of education that you received. So I think the business schools of the future, if I were to start from scratch, I would start there, because we started as degree granting institutions, and that constrains us in so many different ways. And very often that's not what people need right now anymore.
And that's a very interesting new application of blockchain, I'm intrigued by. But Samir, what's your take on the business school of the future if you were starting from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, many of the things that Pascal and Sergey mentioned resonate with me again. But if I step back and I'd say, the guiding principles, there are many things that we can do very differently, but the guiding principles would be still anchored on three really important things. And building from scratch would allow us to double down on those principles. And again, those principles go down to three topics: rigor, which is not compromisable; relevance, which is not compromisable; and impact, which is not compromisable, right? So no matter what we do, even if we get the opportunity to build something new, we cannot compromise on these three dimensions, right? Rigor, relevance, and impact. And I think if I was to build something from scratch, if I was to genuinely deliver on all these three dimensions, then I'd go through an ecosystem approach, right? So I don't think one standalone vertically integrated unit can deliver on all three dimensions in its utmost fashion. Somewhere down the line, something or the other may get compromised because of various constraints that an individual entity may have. But thinking of it as an ecosystem where partners come together, where partners include not just the school and the faculty, but corporations, alumni from various parts of the world, from various industries, and the broader media, perhaps even government, and perhaps even the scientific community, to try and genuinely create a learning ecosystem. If we really had a blank slate to start with, I think that would cater a lot to an individual's lifelong learning needs, as Pascal said, and the ecosystem would be much more capable in terms of adopting and leveraging new technologies, making sure it's relevant and current, making sure that the rigor is not compromised, and at the end of the day, making sure that whatever it is doing has impact. And these dimensions, I think, can be fulfilled best by an ecosystem level thinking rather than a siloed, individualistic, standalone school kind of thinking. I think that would be the big difference in my mind.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, but let me briefly put a couple of others. So, I mean, Sergey, you talked a lot about new technologies, as did Samir. Question here from Alistair Giffen. So who will build this truly immersive VR or AR business verse, which future leaders will use to develop their new skills? Will it be Wharton and INSEAD, Meta, game developers, specialist developers, some combination? What's your take, Sergey?
Yeah, it's going to be a combination. We believe we are years ahead right now in building this kind of a scalable applications, which we created now a bunch of courses, and we keep adding those courses, and they're increasingly going to become available. We are going to move to VR next. We already have a couple of courses designed for virtual reality. So we have a group which I have in my organization, which is building it already. But I expect other players will come, and this is what we see with innovation. Very often, a new player comes which you don't expect. You didn't expect to have Google to be a major competitor in fintech market, or so I'm sure there's going to be some high-tech companies which will try to develop those kinds of capabilities. And these capabilities are kind of truly offer interesting ways to collaborate in our education with alumni. So Harvard Business School had an ingenious model where they would take an alum, write a case about this alum, and then alum comes to class and speaks to 50, 70 students at a time. We take it further. In my virtual reality simulation, I can have an alum who is going to come for years to come, for decades to come, and speak to students and give them advice and so on. And this is what we have now. We have, Mark Lora, who sold his startup to Walmart for $3.5 billion, Jet.com. He comes and he gives advice to entrepreneurs how to start their business and experiment and run a company. And he comes live. You can ask him questions, he will answer, and so on. So that's kind of where we see the future, and we are already building it.
Samir, briefly, the same?
Yeah, so, like any other technology revolution, I agree that it is going to be a lot of players coming in, but I'd go ahead and say that to make this successful and to really make this work, you actually need a lot of people to come in, because you need that complementarity that needs to be developed. You need that little critical mass for people to start thinking and really building off of each other's innovation. If somebody tries to do it in a pocket in one kind of weird area, then it'll be one of those things that comes and goes and nobody really picks up, right? Like the Google Glasses or something like that. So again, many people coming into this from different angles, from different perspectives, is what is going to lead to this kind of truly immersive learning experience. And I honestly believe this is going to be very, very interesting. Now, INSEAD has entered into VR a little bit earlier. We've been creating VR cases. In fact, we heard from Guillaume a little while ago, who's introduced VR into his own classroom, where students get to experience a virtual kind of a manufacturing environment and kind of get to see and feel things despite not being there. And many of our faculty have started including VR-based curriculum in their courses, whether it's degree program or executive program. So we are making progress here. But until and unless an entire kind of ecosystem develops, an entire infrastructure around it develops outside of just INSEAD, I think it'll never take off to that level. But I for sure believe that it will develop, and I cannot wait for it.
Okay. And maybe finally, very briefly, Patricia, I think you said you're on the board of INSEAD, is that right?
Pascal.
Pascal, sorry, excuse me. Pascal, so yeah, because I'm just coming to this question here from Solem Marquette about, so to what extent will INSEAD and Wharton not only adapt to market trends, but also carry a strong and differentiating vision, notably given INSEAD's purpose is to develop responsible leaders?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And yes, indeed, I joined the board of INSEAD 2 years ago. So I will speak about INSEAD. For example, I mean, there is now the Hofmann Institute for Society and Business that has been started thanks to the funding of André Hofmann and his wife. And I do think that this is very important because this is really focusing on making sure that, and you said earlier, or maybe Sergey said earlier, it might be more developed in Europe, but business is really delivering good for the society. And I think this is aligned with ESG. This is, to be honest, in my mind, back to what capitalism was in the 50s and 60s when it was really developing the economies. But how do we align business and the development of society? How do we align the development of companies so that it improves the society? And I think that the way INSEAD is doing it is by having this institute focusing on how do we do business for good. Samir might have something to add to that, and probably the Wharton School side will have as well.
Just very briefly, Samir, and I'll turn to Sergey before flipping to our second question. Samir.
Yeah, Andrew, very briefly. I mean, at the end of the day, INSEAD is a mission-driven school, and this connection between business and society is in our DNA. In fact, it was our founding principle, founded after World War II as an attempt for European reunification in some sense, for a broken Europe, right? So this is very core to us. And our fundamental belief is that if society has to progress, business has a very critical role to play in it. So we don't believe in the orthogonality between profits and purpose. We believe they're aligned. Our challenge is to make sure that we are able to develop leaders of tomorrow who also embody this spirit. And that's what we try to do in our curriculum. Like I said, it doesn't matter. I could be teaching finance, accounting, operations, marketing, as long as we weave in the conversations that address these topics of how purpose is intertwined with profits at the end of the day, and that we are driven by both purpose and creating value, I think we'll be serving the society by developing leaders who embody this DNA.
Thank you. And Sergey, you started off this discussion talking about responding to the market, but what about getting out ahead of it? What do you think Wharton's future role should be in all this?
So we've had initiative, social responsibility initiative for a long time. This was actually an initiative of the previous dean of Wharton, Tom Robertson. It's actually before previous. So we've had it for more than a decade. And he launched it. He created the position of vice dean of social responsibility and social impact. So we've been building curriculum around it. We've been kind of responding to market, and there is more and more activity, of course, in this initiative across all courses. The new dean, Erica James, who came a bit more than a year ago, she created a new pillar, and that's one of 4 pillars of kind of her tenure at Wharton, and it's being responsible business school, responsible to the society as a whole. And so this is this is what we call it now, being responsible, which means many things, starting with the cost of education, for example. So one responsibility to society is to educate, but if our education is very expensive and available to only 0.001%, that creates all kinds of political issues now in the United States. So cost of education is part of it, inclusion, diversity, equity. We just had our first MBA class with more than 50% women. So no other business school came even close to that. So that was kind of a big milestone for us. And we have a number of other initiatives around this, being responsible, making our education available to more and more people around the world, and that's what digital allows us to do.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Make just one last
please, yeah, go ahead.
comment,
sure.
Just as a conclusion, that all this unbundling of content and digital and virtual reality, I hope that the schools won't become too dystopian, and that they will still have a lot of human interaction and relationships between students. I don't remember much of what I learned at Wharton, but I certainly remember my friends.
A really good point. And actually, a couple of people have already spoken on this, but why don't we begin our second round with you, Jacqueline? And here, a reminder, we're talking about this issue of the role of alumni going forwards. Beyond business schools, how can alumni play a role in shaping what to teach, as well as potentially perhaps how? What's your own reflection? And again, I'd invite everyone who's watching to also pop in your suggestions and questions around this over the next 15 minutes or so. Jacqueline.
Well, the alumni must be the messengers to the schools on what it is that the companies need. What kind of leaders do we need? What are the people that we're trying to hire? Pascal mentioned earlier that we have to retain the younger generations who have new values and expect a lot more from their professional lives. I think that, as I mentioned briefly, the corporate governance of boards is something that the schools should focus on, because the average age of directors is going down. There are more women. The old school guys have been kicked or are being kicked out, and new generations are coming. It's important that we be data savvy, that we know how to analyze and manage risks, and I guess the schools do that. They have very good programs working with alumni clubs across the world. Certainly, Wharton is talking to us all the time, helping us to be together and exchange ideas.
So, Pascal, obviously you're very active with INSEAD, but what about more generally in terms of the scope for engaging alumni around and beyond business schools?
Yeah, and look, I mean, on this panel, we also have all the people who organized it. I mean, from INSEAD, Claude Perrol and Pierre, the president of the French Association. I would say that there are a lot of people who actually later in their career, we're all thinking about how do we give back. And I think this is how the alumni can really help. There are mentoring programs that I know are very effective. That's not only the students, but the young professional really like. And I will take the opportunity to address one of the questions I saw as well, which is, this is also where you can actually have an impact in having, for example, in France and actually globally, there are healthcare groups. I mean, speaking of my industry, when there are big conferences, having a healthcare group sharing notes on what is happening in a certain industry is a way where we can actually help the younger generation and the school to think about what is happening in the industry. I think that, to me, it's working pretty well. I would say that this is where schools can actually do even more, and having been discussing the topic with other schools, I know that several schools are thinking about how do we engage the alumni so that we can actually create this link with a younger generation. I'll give you an example. My numbers are not going to be accurate, but I know that it was probably 3 years ago, INSEAD was offering or asking if some alumni were interested to be adjunct professors. And they were actually overwhelmed by the number of people who responded. They needed a few a handful of adjunct professors, and there were actually so many people who were ready to spend their time doing this. I know that some other business schools, Columbia, for example, is probably on the other extreme. They might have too many, because you also want to make sure that you have, when you're taking classes, you want to make sure that you have the level of the faculty that we have in our schools. But I really think that actually this network and this view of giving back is really important. And the last point I would say, and I noticed that when we had a transition with our French association of INSEAD alumni, and there were a lot more younger people who were actually raising their hands to be more active. And I think that this mix of a generation is actually very powerful.
Excellent. Yes, an important point about that balance of the adjuncts or the clinical practitioners alongside the academic researchers. Sergei, you talked about alumni earlier on. So what's your take? What more could you see and expect or hope from alumni and their engagement in education, including with Wharton?
Of course, our alumni is our greatest asset, together with Wharton's brand. We just crossed the mark of 100,000 alumni. We just finished a $1 billion campaign, which is, we are only the second school. So Harvard finished a $1 billion campaign just a little bit earlier. So alumni support us. And of course, in exchange, they ask for things that are important to them. So we have an analytics building now. Why? Because alumni asked for analytics building and they wanted to sponsor something to help us teach analytics. So a lot of things that we do are driven by alumni's desires. One thing that I want to mention is there was something interesting that we learned in pandemic. So we did all kinds of surveys on what people like and don't like about online education. And for example, number one thing that people like that came out was online guest speakers. And this became so easy, so seamless. And so now we engage literally thousands of alumni in live classes. So, they just come by Zoom, they speak to class, take questions and so on, which was rarely possible before. I mean, we did it on a very small scale, but for example, I always shied away from it because I teach 4 sections. So, rare alumni would want to come and repeat kind of 4 times what I do. Only professors can repeat things many times. So now it became very, very easy, and we are growing this. We are making this into kind of a very, very standard practice to speak to alumni in every class, to multiple alumni coming from all parts of the world. And just to give one other example, during the pandemic, we stopped our global courses that go into certain geographies and learn from people on the ground because we couldn't travel. So instead we launched global virtual courses, which seemed like a silly thing to do, but actually some of those virtual courses made a lot of sense. For example, our most popular global virtual course was Innovation in Space. And if you want to study innovation in space, you have to talk to China, to Russia, to India, to the United States, and that's just impossible to go to all of those countries. But virtually they all came together, and we had an endless waiting list for this class, which we continue offering again and again. So, and again, this is all done with help of our alumni working for Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and so on. So that's yet kind of another example where alumni come together with technology, and technology enables alumni to help us shape what we teach.
Samir, what's your take? The role of alumni and how that needs to evolve or could be useful.
Yeah, so to add to I guess everything that others have said before me, I'm gonna, if I was to use a finance language, I'm sorry, Jacqueline, if I butcher it, but I'd say the alumni are the residual claimants of the school, right? At the end of the day, they are the residual claimants, right? The school kind of belongs to the alums, right? Professors are employees, they can move up and down, but alumni actually make for what I consider as a residual claimants, which means that they should be involved, and INSEAD alumni are of course involved in multiple aspects of the school. So as you can see with Pascal on the board, there's very heavy participation. Alumni, and they can contribute in various ways, right? So starting all the way from what Sergei said, when alumni give back to the school, to really allow the school to stay ahead of the curve, to actually create content and to create pedagogy, which is ahead and forward-looking and not catching up. And resources can allow faculty and the school in general to kind of go out there. So, you know, Pascal mentioned about the Hofmann Institute of Business and Society, right? So that's another example of an alum coming in and really kind of fostering the kind of, you know, putting some impetus behind the DNA of the school and taking it to the next level. That's one way. The other way is lifelong learning. I mean, at the end of the day, the alums are not just are not former learners. They are learners, and no matter what stage they are in their careers, you know, they can be engaged with the school, and they should be engaged, and they are engaged with the school to continue their lifelong journey with us. So we've been running lifelong learning events with our alumni, you know, for the last few years, and it's been really successful. We get a lot of participation from alums. They're very curious. They're very involved. They really want to learn more, and the spirit that they embody is very encouraging, because not only do they learn with us, but they reciprocate, because as they learn with us, we get to learn from them, whether what we are talking about in these lifelong learning events, does it resonate with them? Does it not resonate with them? If it resonates, what element resonates? If it doesn't resonate, what doesn't resonate? And that kind of feedback really helps us learn. So it's almost like a mutual learning environment where we all kind of communally benefit from each other. And finally, coming back to my earlier concept of the ecosystem, and if I go back to, again, I keep talking about this because this is so core to our value system, the rigor, the relevance, and the impact. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to co-produce value. We have to, you know, when Pascal was talking about alumni coming into INSEAD and becoming adjunct faculty, and some of them, and this is very important for us because, you know, bringing in industry experts, bringing in people who are out there who've kind of learned not only academically, but also, you know, from being on ground zero and kind of building their knowledge through both a combination of academics, but also experience, and bringing them into our curriculum, into our learning environment is very, very important. But you see, we're not TripAdvisor, right? So quality is really, really important here. Like, we got to control who's the one, but what's the best filter of quality? Well, it's our alums, right? I mean, to us, they are our most trusted partners. When an alumnus comes into my classroom or into any INSEAD classroom and speaks to our audience, to our current INSEAD students, the level of credibility is just incredibly high. So that gives a lot of kind of confidence in us that we are bringing in people who are relevant, but we are not compromising on rigor because we know them. These are our alums. So the alumnus participation is a multi-dimensional participation, which I think touches almost every aspect of our existence in some sense. So very, very important to us.
And perhaps flipping the question a little bit, perhaps back to you, Pascal. I'm guessing this is an INSEAD event. I may be wrong. Gretel here says, you know, yesterday's Marvel session was wonderful because of the guest speaker. As an alumna, a lecture-like event is not that attractive, which sort of raises the point about also what the alumni, including everyone here watching, wants or expects or needs also from their business school going forwards. Any reflections more on that, what your appetite for continued education is and what that relationship should be?
So I was wondering what this Marvel session was. I even tried to Google it. So
so did I. Maybe it's Wharton.
But in any case, I think that what you just said is really important. And it's back to a point I made at the very beginning. It is, how do you leverage this technology to still make it interactive enough so that you create the exchange? And I can only speak to INSEAD because I do remember that I had signed for one of the very first online class on digital strategy because I was curious to how it worked, and I have to say that I was impressed by how much better it was than just a delivery. You know, the on-demand video is nice, but I don't know about you, but I know that myself and my daughter is the same. Is that, well, you click on it and then you start doing something else, so you're not as engaged, and the learning comes from the engagement. So so I really think that this is going to be important to just drive the engagement. Actually, driving the engagement of the alumni, driving the engagement of the students is going to be really critical. Whether the sessions are online session, hybrid, or I mean live. The core of the teaching was the engagement of the student, but transferring that to the hybrid or online is going to make the whole difference to me.
Sure. What about you, Jacqueline? Any take?
One of the things about the alumni that's very important to me and I think to a lot of others is the network. We can go anywhere in any company, in any country, and we'll find somebody with whom we have a very strong connection. And we just know that you were talking about credibility of alumni talking to your students, but also amongst ourselves, the level of instant connection is very high. And that's one of the big values of having been part of this very privileged group of people, beyond what the school has taught us.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I think, let me just have a look and see if there's any final questions. Yeah, I mean, perhaps I'll just flip it very briefly back to both Sergey and Samir for any kind of final thought. And obviously we've talked a lot here about some of the discrete, the MBAs and so on, but you've both talked about lifelong learning. And there's a few questions here also about executive education. So any final thoughts really about how to enhance that future relationship, including for ongoing education and engagement with your alumni? Samir.
Andrew, thanks a lot. So yeah, our direction and our future is looking more towards making sure that INSEAD operates in synergies with the broader community out there, with corporates, with alums, with our current students, and also with the government. So we believe it's very important, if business schools are to have an impact, that we do not think about the world in a silo, where we deliver whatever we believe is important, and then let our students or our graduates figure out how to operate in the wider world. We think the world is deeply connected, and it's getting even more connected. So what is important for us is to make sure that we foster and deepen these connections. And it is these connections, when combined with modern technologies, with modern way of thinking, that I think will ultimately result in genuinely creating value when it comes to business education. So that's really the direction in which we are trying to go, and pushing, almost doubling down on this.
Okay, Sergey, a final word?
I want to mention that we had a very interesting and unexpected way to connect with alumni. So when a few years back we launched all kinds of programs for high school students, we realized that this is a fantastic way to connect with our alumni, because all of our alumni want their kids to get a taste of Wharton. And they call our dean and they say, can you help with my child, admitted into undergraduate? And we say, no, we cannot. Our admission rate is something like 5%, and it's not controlled by us. It's, there is a kind of a wall. We cannot really help with that. And our undergraduate program admits only so many students. But since then, we educated hundreds and hundreds of high school age children of alumni. And this created even a stronger bond when a child comes back and says, hey, I stayed in this dormitory on campus where you dad stayed, 30 years ago, and I had these professors that you had. So that was an unexpected bonus for us when we launched those programs. So I just wanted to say that this is yet another way to connect with alumni through their children and then grandchildren and so on.
Okay, well, look, that's very helpful. Apologies, we haven't got through quite all the questions, but I think everyone could follow also the Q&A chat for other reflections. I find it a very interesting, insightful set of reflections. I should say, incidentally, the FT continues to be interested in trying to ensure that both its coverage and its rankings are as relevant as possible, and we're very open to any of your ideas on how to measure and assess particularly some of these newer areas that reflect both hybrid teaching, as we've discussed, the relative value of a virtual versus a real internship, for example, and also some of those wider softer skills and the issues of sustainability that we've talked about. But thank you all very much for your insights on the panel here, Sergey, Samir, Pascal, and Jacqueline. And I think back over to our organizers for a couple of concluding remarks.
Okay, I'm François Balzan. I'm the former president of the Wharton Club of France and a member of the French board. And I just, boy, what a quantity of information, but how much converging I heard, and I think the takeaways we have are really that there is a very strong convergence in both in creativity, in the stance, and especially in the stance as leaders and innovators for both of our institutions. So I would very simply say that this is a really, to me, my personal takeaway is that this is a very strong case for the alliance, the working alliance, and the working alliance propelled by the alumni communities. And that's the way I think we've built it or contributed on our modest side as alumni in different stages of organizations during the past 20 years. And we should really keep going. We should also, I think, and with the board of the French Alumni Association of Wharton and the INSEAD Alumni Association France, I think we could agree that there is much need for sequels. And that can be both virtual and real. And we would be very happy to invite both our deans in Paris for a very big sequel next year, COVID permitting. And so thank you very much to our attendants, and thank you so much to our 4 panelists who so skillfully represented points of views that are both creative and that will be food for thoughts for the sequels we are going to build together. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. That was very good to have you, and we hope we will keep the dialogue with the Financial Times on these subjects and these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank
Have a good day.
you.
Bye.